know, Zoom can be a tad bit awkward sometimes, but I'm happy that you're all here. And I want to introduce to you all our first speaker. Amanda Warlick is a PhD student in the Quantitative Conservation Lab at the University of Washington School of Aquatic and Fishery Science. And her talk tonight is entitled Developing a New Framework to Estimate the Effects of Environmental Variability on Reproductive Success and Abundance of Pigeon Guillemots, Puget Sound indicator species. So with that, I'll let Amanda take it away. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. It is so, hopefully you guys can all see my screen now. It's so nice to be here. Thank you for sharing this fun and celebratory evening with me. It's too bad we can't all be in person, but I wanted to start off by thanking you all, because I wouldn't be here if it weren't for all the hard work that you all put in to make this program what it is. So I actually decided that I was going to step back a little bit and really focus on talking to you today about why we use statistical models to improve our understanding of wildlife species to begin with. So hopefully you'll find some of this interesting and inspiring to keep on doing all the great work that you do. So as I mentioned, statistical models, why do we need them? You all go out and of course you're experts at what you do. You count the birds, you watch them deliver fish to their chicks. Why do we need to have statistical models at all? So the reason that we do apply statistical models to answer wildlife questions is because of course we're in search of some truth. And we don't quite know what that truth is, because as good as you are at what you do, you can't quite observe nature perfectly. That's just the way it goes. You never quite know exactly how many birds you counted, for example. So when we think about those imperfect observations, we're talking about how much bias we have, how much accuracy we have, and how much precision. And so what that means is, are we systematically getting it wrong in some way? How close to the truth are we? And for example, if we counted those birds again, how close would we be to the first time we counted? So that's to sort of pique your interest. But in our case, what we're doing, or what you're doing, is counting individual birds in one instance. And what we're wondering is, did we miss any, or did we count some twice? Do those individuals actually belong to my colony? Sarah and I were out with Francis, and we also went out with Terrence a couple of years ago, and we were humbled by how challenging it can be to make those counts that you do. And so when we use statistical models, we're basically admitting that we know we can't get it perfectly right, and we're trying to understand how wrong we are. And so in the second instance, when you guys are watching the prey deliveries and the burrow visits, what we're looking at is trying to understand how many nests were successful, of course. So how many nests fledged a chick? Was there a fish in that beak? And if so, what was it? And maybe we missed a few weeks of prey deliveries. It's really hard to know. So when we're, as sort of quantitative ecologists, looking at the data that you all collect, these are the kinds of questions that we are thinking about. Okay, so backing up still again, we want to, with a statistical model, estimate things of interest by understanding how much we miss or how far off we are. So when we sort of put together a model, what we come out of with is some value of interest, and then our degree of certainty about how accurate that value is. And then going even further, what we do in our group at the University of Washington a lot of times has to do with data integration. And it's becoming a really popular tool recently for statisticians. And what it means is bringing multiple pieces of information together into the same statistical model. And what that does is that it even further improves our estimates And it allows us to learn about certain components, say a puzzle piece that we didn't even have information about. So for Pigeon Guillemots, what that means for what I do is that I take the counts that you make and the burrow visit observations and I put them into the same framework. So overall, my project goals, like I've been sort of hinting around, the first is to estimate regional Pigeon Guillemot abundance trends. So is the population increasing? Is it stable? Is it decreasing? And in order to understand how many Pigeon Guillemots are out there, this abundance number, that really is a product of what we call demographic rates. And that means births, deaths, immigration, emigration. And for me, what I'm really focusing on is the first two in bold. So survival and reproduction. How many Pigeon Guillemots sort of survive from year to year? What is the rate at which a nest survives from week to week? And once that nest produces a successful, or once the nest is successful, in other words, producing a chick, at what rate does that happen in the population? So that's what reproduction is really getting at. And so once we are thinking about abundance, we really need to kind of zoom in on that reproduction piece. So estimating reproduction for me, in this case, is my second goal. And we have to do that without what we are referring to as sort of a perfect understanding of how old the nest is, what state it's in, or whether it's fate. So whether there's a chick that's successfully fledged. And we don't have that perfect knowledge because, as you all know, you go every week and you don't know when that egg was laid, or you don't exactly know what day the chick might have hatched. And then, of course, you don't know whether it fledged or not. So we have to build this model with all this uncertainty about that nest in order to estimate whether there was ultimately a chick that was produced from that nest. And of course, you all have, and it's very easy to say, well, let's guess and see if we think we saw prey deliveries for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. That must at some point indicate that there was a chick that successfully survived. But again, we can never be quite certain. So what the models that we build do is, again, it sort of helps us narrow in on that certainty or uncertainty, as it were. And this is particularly true, this framework or this idea, we're hoping that it's broadly applicable to other sort of cryptic nesting species like the Pigeon Guillemot, sneaky burrowing into their cliffside burrows to make their nests. And so the third goal ultimately is to understand how all these processes that I'm talking about, so survival and reproduction, what their connection might be to current or prevailing environmental conditions in Puget Sound. And that's particularly motivated by the fact that they are they have this indicator species status, but we really ultimately don't know what they are. They might be an indicator of. Is it good or bad prey availability? Is it something with sea surface temperature? What is it that they might be an indicator of? So in order to address that question, we can really look at the relationship between certain environmental variables and these demographic rates that we estimate. So does reproduction or nest success vary with sea surface temperature or upwelling or some metric of fish abundance? So that's sort of an outline of my overall project goals. And so now I'm going to describe to you sort of how we put these pieces of information together, these integrated models. So normally for many kinds of species where you'd have this kind of model, you have some sort of what we call mark recapture data, where a bird might be banded so that you can identify it from year to year when it comes back. So you get some estimate of survival. So a bird was here this year and it was here last year, so that we know it survived. And then you would combine that with some nest monitoring data where you would get what I've called end-fledge, so the number of fledglings and some measure of fecundity or reproduction. You would check the nest, you would see that there's chicks in the nest, and you would ultimately know, yes, this nest was successful, no, this nest wasn't. So then you combine those pieces of information with your counts, just as you all count the birds next to the colony, then you combine all that information and you can formulate an estimate of how many there are. So that's not quite what we have. As you know, these birds aren't banded, so you can't identify them from year to year. So we can't use that approach. And we also don't have this traditional nest monitoring data because we can't see inside these cliffside burrows. And we do, however, have counts that you make. So in order to adapt to this traditional framework to the Pigeon Guillemot sort of data landscape, what we do for here is that we use some external information, say either about another guillemot population, maybe they are banded somewhere else, or another very similar species. So we can kind of use some external information to get at that issue. And then what we do have here is all of your hard work to observe these birds and whether they're bringing fish to the burrows. So we use that to estimate what the nest's true state is based on the pattern of this prey and non-prey visit. And then we can estimate whether there was fledging based on how long the chick state goes on. And of course, as I mentioned before, this approach is challenged by not knowing the exact age of the nest. And so then lastly, showing how environmental conditions might play into this framework, we're interested in understanding, for example, if sea surface temperature, upwelling, or wind, for example, has an impact on any of these processes. So just to kind of reiterate, looking at nest success in this sort of novel framework that I'm trying to develop, we don't know the nest age, the state, or the fate. So we're using the knowledge of the species and we know how long their incubation and chick rearing periods are. So we kind of put that information into the model as well. And then in terms of our challenges for estimating abundance, this is, as I mentioned, an unmarked or an unbanded population. So we have to use knowledge of the species from other areas or something else external to this region. And then, so the next question is, what kinds of tools do we have when we're trying to sort of push the bounds of the information that we have and the frameworks that we're trying to develop? In this case, one of the really important tools that we have is called data simulation. And that's exactly what it sounds. You basically simulate data as close to what you think is happening for pigeon guillemots or any other species that you're interested in. And the real benefit is that you know the truth because you were the one that made up the data. And then you can examine how well the model does at revealing that truth that you fed it to begin with. So all that is to say is that is one of the approaches that I am using in this context as we work to sort of understand whether we can build this type of model. So I'm going to show you very briefly some of the results that we have from this effort to make up data and then see how well the model does at estimating our original truth. So in this case, I've imagined a colony with 50 burrows, and it has egg and chick survival that you give it. And what you see here are figures that show you how close to the truth you are. And what you can sort of, without focusing too much on the details of, because it's fairly technical, these plots, but what you want to focus on is how close the red dot is to all of those small gray dots, and then also the black line. And what this is showing us is that the red mark is very close to that black line, and that's a great sign. So that means that we aren't seeing a lot of bias, and especially on the plot on the right, you can see that there's really tight precision because those estimates, that box is very narrow. So, and similarly, these metrics that we're interested in on the x-axis here, it's the number number of nests that an egg was laid, and then the number that had an egg that was hatched, and then the number that had an egg that was fledged, or a chick that fledged, sorry. And so you can see those numbers decline. So you had approximately 50 nests that were laid, and about half of that hatched, and even fewer fledged. But really what we're looking for is how close that red line is to the black bar. And so what this tells us is that we're on the right track, and that our framework is really likely to be successful when we apply it to our real data. So kind of glossing over some of these details, what this ultimately shows is that the framework we've built, like I said, is returning what we gave it. It's returning very close to truth. And so then we go out on a limb and we say, well, what happens when we apply the same framework to our real data? That real data tend to be really messy. And I've only looked at Hancock Lake so far with this framework, and only over 3 years. So first of all, again, these plots are a little technical, but what we're looking at is daily egg and daily chick survival. So every day, what was the probability that that nest or that burrow kept surviving? And these numbers are very high because, of course, over the season, every day, the probability is going to be pretty high that the nest or the burrow continues to persist. But what you kind of want to look at is how the mean estimate is the dot, and then the precision that you have is that line. So in 2013, there only happened to be 9 burrows, which is why the line is so much wider. It means that we weren't nearly as certain as we were in the other years. And that just happens because we have a small sample size, we have greater uncertainty. And then, so we have this burrow detection and the classification probability. That's something that is in the model by necessity, but it doesn't have a very great ecological meaning. The closest is that was the probability that a burrow that had a chick in it was actually only detected by a non-prey burrow visit. So sorry, a little bit technical there, but basically what we see again is that the uncertainty is greater when we have fewer nests, and we kind of are looking for whether these numbers are similar from year to year. And again, kind of just getting to see what these, how these data behave in this model framework. So really just exploratory so far. And then the last technical thing I'll show is what this looks like when we're estimating the number of burrows that fledged, hatched, and laid. And so these are called what are called posterior distributions, and where the little mountains peak, that's the sort of best estimate. And then how wide these peaks are represents, again, our uncertainty. So this is just what we look for to see whether the model is working again. And what we would expect is that, of course, as you go from yellow to blue, the numbers are decreasing. And again, we're kind of just looking to understand if this model is working and if we can estimate the number that we're out there based on our imperfect observations of these burrows and of this system. So, technical part aside, going back to the big picture, all those details that I just described, those results, they're just going to this small piece that I've highlighted here in yellow. So that's to say that we are doing a lot with the data that you are collecting, and have really big goals of having this grand model framework that ultimately will help us understand this system in terms of how many guillemots are out there and at what rate they are surviving and reproducing every year. And then ultimately, as I mentioned, what their relationship is with their local environment. So in conclusion, I'm really excited about this novel nest success model framework, because all the other models that do this kind of thing that estimate nest success, they really rely on knowing the state and the fate of the nest. So that means that without that, there isn't a way currently in the existing literature of how to estimate nest success when we have a situation like the guillemots where we can't see into the nest. So that's brand new. So we're really excited about developing that with pigeon guillemots as a case study, but we're hoping that it can be useful for other species as well. So as I mentioned, the only way this works is if we use knowledge of the species. So if we say we're really pretty sure that incubation is so many days long and then chick rearing is this many days long, we really use that information to narrow in on the age and state and fate of the burrow. And from that, we get daily nest survival and fledging ages. And this framework really highlights the utility of community science data. And again, it wouldn't be possible without all of your hard work. And so ultimately, big picture, we're hoping to tie this, as I said, the relationship between ocean conditions or the conditions in Puget Sound to this nest success. And we're hoping that it's really applicable to other similar species. And with that, of course, I meant to thank Govinda for all the beautiful photos. And I would, again, like to reiterate how grateful we are that your hard work has resulted in such a wealth of information for this beautiful bird. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions or just hand it off to Emily.
Yeah, so I thank you so much, Amanda. That was awesome. Really appreciate you being here and sharing that with us. I should have reiterated this before for folks that came in a little bit later. Our format for asking questions is to type in questions in our chat, and then Terrence is going to be moderating. And we can do this going forward with Emily, but if you have a question as things are going along, feel free to throw it in there and Terrence will catch it.
All right. We've got one question so far. So we don't know how many chicks are laid or fledged. How does that affect the data?
Yeah, so that's a beautiful part of this model framework. That's what it's designed to estimate. I could have talked to you for many more minutes about sort of the finer points of this model, but the idea is to use to estimate how many we miss essentially, and from that sort of back step, if we know this many were laid, then we can estimate how many hatch and how many fledge. But that's the whole magic that we definitely don't know. Even though we think you guys have a pretty good sense for how many nests are there, we're still working on understanding or figuring out how to handle the multiple eggs and chicks per burrow. That's something that we're not exactly, that I think it adds additional complexity.
So that's a nice segue to the next question, which is there any additional data that we can be collecting that would help you with your modeling?
You guys are so generous to continue to ask that. It's such a good question. And it's amazing how well you've adapted. I think we already made our asks and we're getting the best that we can from these sneaky cryptic nesters. I think it's great to just focus on doing what you already do and do it well. So yeah, I'm continuing to keep your protocols consistent and your methods consistent. I think sometimes that matters more than collecting additional information. But it's certainly a great question. I wish that I had a crystal ball. In 10 years, we wish we would have been collecting this. That's always the case.
So that said, have you established any broad conclusions about the Pigeon Guillemot condition that you can essentially boil down into layman's terms?
Unfortunately, we don't have results yet. What I would how I would boil down my work so far is to say that what you all collect is amazing, and I hope to do justice by it. And what we are doing is new and exciting, and maybe next year I'll have more information.
A question from myself, actually. What sort of mechanisms do you have within the model framework to be able to parse out any potential double counting?
Of the birds themselves, that just comes out when we estimate the sort of uncertainty around our detection for the counts themselves. So basically you have these sub models, and we'll have a model around the counts, and that comes out with our uncertainty about detection. So if you counted 30 at the start of the survey, and then 40, and then 20, you know, that sort of variance is the best that we can do. But we can never know. I mean, it's either natural variability or observation error. So it's kind of difficult to specifically understand double counting. It all just sort of goes into that precision of that estimate.
All right. If folks don't have any other questions, I want to be cognizant of our timing this evening, and sensitive to Amanda's time as well. Amanda, thank you so much. Really appreciate hearing all this, your hard work. It's really exciting to be a part of a community science project that has so much collaboration. Yeah, it's really great to have you. So thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Right back at you. Thanks for all the hard work that you all do.
All right. Well,